Welcome to this week's edition of Clear Truth Media. My name is Stephen. I'm the founder. We are in a series entitled Insurrectionist. And when you hear that word, maybe you think something vile or something sneaky or evil. Well, in the scriptures, it said that the church in Thessalonica turned the world upside down. How did they do it? Did they do it through guns, political action, or war? Nope. They did it by simply following Jesus, obeying him, and living a life of radical obedience. Open up your Bible and join us. So we are in 1 Thessalonians. We're calling this series Insurrectionist. And the term or the title is really, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek, particularly right now, is all we hear about, or a lot about, is insurrection and all this kind of stuff around the world here, everything like that. And so we picked this just because it kind of depicts this kind of ironic idea. The ironic idea being that the First Thessalonian, or the church in Thessalonica, was accused of turning the world upside down, as being insurrectionists. And then we're studying, well, what did they do as insurrectionists? Did they riot? Did they start a fight? Did they beat anybody up? Did they kill anyone? Did they try to take over? Nope. They didn't do any of those things. What did they do? Well, that's what we're looking at, and we're kind of seeing what is this pathway to insurrection? What are the traits underneath? In Acts 17:5, it says that they turned the world upside down. And so we're asking a pretty simple question. How do you be a part of something that turns the world upside down? Last week, my dad taught, and I thought he did a great job of re-looking at Acts 17:5, because really the world said they turned the world upside down, but we know that the world was actually being turned upside or right side up. That the world is naturally upside down. It's upside down because of sin. It's upside down because of brokenness. And God is in this great cosmic plan of redeeming his world. Romans, remember, tells us that creation itself groans. It's waiting in eager anticipation, right? Our bodies are waiting in eager anticipation for the full redemption to come. But in the meantime, from now until final redemption, which will be a theme, by the way, in 1 Thessalonians when we get closer to the end of it, Christ's return and the second coming and these types of things. But from now until then, what role do we play in right-siding the world and bringing redemption to our lives and to our families and to our city and all of those types of things, and then whatever way God would call us to bring redemption out to the world? And so that's the idea here around insurrection. And here's two things we've learned thus far. In week one, we learned that where you start insurrection can matter. Paul picked Thessalonica for a reason. If you remember back to week one, Paul arrived in Thessalonica because he had heard a vision of somebody who had told him to go to Macedonia, and Thessalonica was an important part in the region of Macedonia. And so Paul ends up in Thessalonica. It's this big town, one of the more powerful, prominent cities in the Roman Empire, filled with history, filled with all of these natural or practical reasons why, if Thessalonica came to Christ, why it would have a resounding impact. One of my favorite conversations with people, particularly, actually, it doesn't matter if they live in Toledo or if they live not in Toledo. When I have conversations, though, with people outside of Toledo, most of them have never been here. We'll have these little conversations. These are pastors, right? Or, some of them don't even live in the country. And they're like, well, Ohio, tell me about it. All of that kind of stuff. And I know we all kind of weirdly wear this like badge of honor of like, oh, Toledo, right? Like that kind of thing. But though, recently I think it's been on the upswing a little bit, which is great. And I think we're just enjoying, low housing prices, all things considered, right? And we're seeing the value of this. But one of the things that I always say to people outside of Toledo is this, that what I love about Toledo is that it is small enough where you can accomplish just about anything. And it's actually big enough that it matters. I think last I looked in the last census, we were like the 59th or 60th largest city in the country, right? And so 60, that's pretty good, right? But we all know this, like we're all 3 people away from knowing everybody in town, right? I was with somebody the other day. They said, I've learned in Toledo you can ask 3 questions, and at that point you'll have a connection. What year were you born? Where did you go to school? And what part of town did you live in? I'm like, yeah, that's pretty much. You will find a connection there somewhere if you do that. And so what I love about Toledo, what I've always loved about Toledo, again, is small enough that you can do anything. It's big enough that it actually matters. And so where you do insurrection matters. That's what we talked about in week 1. In week 2, my dad just walked through a whole bunch of traits of insurrectionists. So like he did last week repeatedly, I will repeat his points tonight. So what do insurrectionists do? They go to God first. They work hard or they labor in love. They operate as a family. They have the power of God's word. They have strong leaders. They set a tone for other people or an example for other people. They get results and they keep the end in mind. That's what insurrectionists do. I thought it was a great teaching and a great filter for us to say, okay, if I want to be a part of this, then I got to fit in those categories. That's what an insurrectionist does, right? And so that's the point of why we're kind of like just slowly teaching here through 1 Thessalonians this semester, so we can learn from them. What did they actually do to turn the world upside down? Now, today, what Paul's going to talk about, he's going to kind of transition. And I want to make sure I get everybody going along with me here as I go through these next few verses, these next 8 verses, because you might be able or think for a second, like, does this really relate to me as an individual? And I would say, well, it does, because all Scripture does. But what Paul, the title of this section is Paul's ministry to the Thessalonians. And so what Paul is doing here a bit, not quite the way he does it in 1 Corinthians when he really goes to town and he's like defending himself and all of this kind of stuff. But Paul here he's defending his ministry a bit. He's saying, this is how I operated. This is how I acted. Now, there's a couple of ways on why this relates to you. Number one, because it shows you what you should expect in a healthy way of people in ministry. And that's a good thing for you to know. And so you can look in here and go, okay, what is normal? Or maybe not normal. Normal is probably the worst word to use, actually. Okay, what should be normal? What could I expect from people in ministry? Okay, number one. Number two, there's oftentimes where Paul says, hey, imitate me as I follow Christ. And so all of us, from me to our elders to each and every one of you, can look and say, okay, there's got to be something in how Paul operated as a leader that has great value for us. As individuals in the body of Christ. That's number two. Number three, a third reason I would say this is why this relates to you, is that most of us have some level of influence or leadership in our life. We're probably leading something, or we have some level of influence, right? And it's not a perfect comparison in leading in the church to like leading, wherever it is, Burger King, wherever it is that you do, right? But there is enough value and understanding and then applying these traits into our context, right? And then I'll give you one more. The fourth reason why I do think this is valuable as well is, you've probably heard this, that the best leaders, right, were once good followers. The best leaders were once good followers. That there's a way of learning from a leader and going, okay, well, if that's what the leader does, then I'll just act like that, right? And that's either training me or it's really helping participate or create movement wherever you're at. And so that's why I think all of this is very relevant. So last week we did a lot of insurrectionists do this as individuals. Today, a little bit I'm going to talk about is how do insurrectionist leaders operate? How do insurrectionist leaders operate? And so I'm going to pull those things out here this evening, and we'll just kind of do it a little bit verse by verse. Let's start with the first one. For you yourselves know, brothers, that our coming to you was not in vain. Okay, here's my first point. Insurrectionist leaders are effective. They are effective. When Paul says that our coming to you was not in vain, here's a little bit of what he means. His point in verse 1 is that they didn't just show up with smoke and mirrors. The three of them, remember, Paul, Silvanus or Silas, and Timothy, that when they showed up, they actually accomplished something. It's normal for people. I don't know why this particularly happens in ministry, but it is normal for people to pretend like they're being effective when they aren't actually being that effective. And what Paul is saying here, he says, guys, when we showed up, it was not in vain. It was not smoke and mirrors. It was not a bunch of tricks to make you think that things are going well when they weren't really going well. Have you ever heard like a ministry pitch? Maybe it doesn't even have to be a ministry pitch, but it could be something else, right? But we'll talk about the ministry context. And maybe you're listening to the pitch and you're trying to hear them, and then you hear it, and then you hear it 5 years later, then you hear it 10 years later, then you hear it 20 years later, and at some point in time you're scratching your head and you're like, wait, that's like the same thing I heard 20 years ago. Like, what's happened in the last 20, like, isn't there another story to share? Like, God has to have done something in the last 20 years, right? And sometimes you'll hear this, right? You'll hear this. Guys, this is a funny one I heard once, okay? This would connect. I was down in West Virginia. We had family in West Virginia, and that's where my dad grew up. And he didn't grow up. Well, kind of. He was born around there. And then we'd go down there every summer. And I was down there once by myself. And I just went down there to climb and, you know, all that kind of stuff and hang out in the house. And so anyway, I went to church. And I went in there, and the pastor got up, and I just went to any church I was close to. And this was about as Baptist, West Virginia Baptist, as you could possibly imagine, okay? And so I snuck into the back row, and I was listening. The guy gets up there, and he was talking about VBS. And he was talking about VBS with more fervor, right, than any person I've ever heard talk about VBS. But listen, guys, I'm just like, I'd been doing ministry for a while. I could see what was going on in this room. And this guy's talking about, like, you know, these kids, and they got saved and all of this kind of stuff. And I'm looking around, and I'm like, okay, these have to have been the same kids who came last year. And they had to have been the same kids who came the year before. And they had to have been the same kids who came the year before. And he's like trying to like rile everybody up. And the crowd was just dead, by the way. I mean, dead. Like when I watched that worship service go, it was like forever implanted in my head because of how angry every man in that building was, right? While church was going down. And I thought to myself, like, this is having a negative effect. Like you're trying to champion like some great success, and everybody is seeing through it. So Paul shows up into Thessalonica. He says, guys, you know we didn't do that. We didn't come spinning some magic story. We didn't come saying and bragging about every story and, oh, you got to believe this and like, oh, this happened. And you're like, how come every person that comes to Christ in your church like literally was worse than the prodigal son, right? Like every story. And Paul said, we did not do that. What did we do? Paul says, he says, we just came in and we were effective. In other words, the proof was in the pudding. We let the results speak for themselves. We let the results speak for themselves. And I think this is important across all of our lives, right? We live in such an age right now, whether it's social media or just in conversations with people, where we like to one-up each other. I hope you never get caught up into this, like church-upping each other. Right, where it's like, oh yeah, here's what's going on in our church, here's what's going on, and you, right, and just let the results. Paul's saying, let the results speak for themselves. Sometimes I'll talk to people and they're like, man, you got to tell more story, you got to post it on your social media, and you got to talk about the money you guys give away, and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, no, just let the results speak for themselves. Let God move. Don't come in vain. Don't smoke and mirror. Just be faithful.
Are you looking for a church that believes the Bible is relevant today as the day that it was written? That preaches from the Word of God every week? That is multi-generational? That is good for the whole family? That isn't afraid to talk about the important issues of our day? We invite you to experience redemption for yourself. For more information, please visit experienceredemption.com. Interested in furthering your education, but you don't know where to start? Revere Bible College is here to help. Birthed at a redemption church, Revere's goal is to rebuild culture by reclaiming education. Learn more at reverebiblecollege.com.
Just be faithful. So that's Paul's first point. Now, he's going to tell us that it's not easy. Because look at what he says in verse 2. But though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. Paul's like, you guys know how bad it's been. You know how hard it's been. People were telling stories. We suffered. We had been shamefully treated. And it was such that everybody was like, they were spreading it around. And I've been fortunate enough to hear some of these stories lately. I did a live show on Tuesday with a guy. He's a pastor in outside of London. And he was fired by his, get this, he was fired by his evangelical college. Okay, and the reason he was fired is because he refused to not affirm gay marriage as biblically faithful. And so they fired him. And so here he is. This is one of the leading evangelical colleges in Great Britain, right? Okay, and here he is now. He's just fired. And like, we had lots of conversations. Like, was there anything else? Like, did you secretly, like, beat somebody up? Like, did you know, like, did something? No, he's like, no. And so now he doesn't have a job. And so I'm having this conversation with him. And then I was having another conversation with another guy. I mentioned this the other day. And just he's telling me about, he's like, dude, Australia is so screwed up. He's like, you guys don't even know. You are so lucky. He's like, I've been watching your guys' politics. I love your politics. He's like, Kamala Harris would be like our Donald Trump. Yeah. He's like, I'm not kidding. He's like, it's so much worse than you could possibly think. He said, and here's the crazy thing. People think either like, oh, politics don't matter. He's like, do you know how bad it is? He's like, there's not he said, I can name like 9 pastors in Australia who aren't afraid to preach the gospel anymore. What? Because they'll take your money. They'll send you to jail. He said, our churches are dying, or they've had to just completely give in. He's like, so tell those crazy people over there who don't think it's matter, like, you're our last hope. You are our last hope. He's like, I'm looking at our political choices. Yeah, this is what he said. He said, like, you're right. Kamala Harris is our right wing. So then it just gets worse. He's like, and this is for real. He's like, I live in it every day. He said, and by the way, if they still don't care, in America, it costs average houses 4x the average income. He said, here it's 16. So that would be like in Toledo, the average house price being $800,000. Okay. He's like, so it matters. He said, and guess how much people are able to give in Australia? Nothing. He said, the church is broke. The church is broke. We can't do anything. The government took all of our money. He's like, so no one's going into me. He's like, it's impossible, right? So he's like, warn all the crazy people. I'm like, okay, all right. But I'm chatting with him, and he's like, this suffering, like I can share this. I've heard it, right? You can see how bad it is. By the way, I was like, dude, where's Hillsong on this? Because I was super curious. Right? Because I'm like, hey, it's Australia. Everybody knows this. We sing their songs. We just sang at least one. It might have been 2. Right? I was like, where's Hillsong? Just out of curiosity on that. He's like, oh, dude, those guys are straight up communists. I was like, seriously? He's like, yeah. He's like, they play really good conservatives when they go to America because they know what they're doing. He's like, but those dudes are straight up commies. I was like, dang. I was like, we'll probably still sing the songs, but man. I was like, I'm not going to another concert. Man. That's sad, right? Okay. It's the kind of suffering that Paul faced was the kind that went out, that people talked about. It's the guys in Australia. It's the guys in Europe, right? It's my friend in St. Louis right now that the IRS is suing them because they held a school rally against transgender bathrooms in an elementary. Okay? And now the IRS is suing them and threatening to take away their tax-exempt status, which isn't going to happen, but the IRS just likes to mess with you, right? It's that kind of stuff. Paul says, though we had already suffered and been shamefully treated at Philippi, as you know, he says, you know it was hard. You know we were facing a lot. But what did they have? He said we had boldness. We had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. Insurrectionist leaders have grit, courage, and boldness. And insurrectionist followers, people in the congregation, must have the same. It's easy to quit, give up, give in, and look for something easier. It is. But Paul says we had boldness in our God, and I would suggest it is really only boldness when it is in the midst of much conflict. It's not boldness when there's no conflict. It's not boldness when nobody cares, right? It's not boldness when there's no threatening on the other side. It is boldness when there is. He says, we had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of much conflict. Much conflict. Grit, courage, and boldness. And who knows regardless of what happens in November, who knows what the future of our country looks like? And it's funny because whenever I say that to either a European or an Australian, you know what they say back? They say, I know what it looks like. I can tell you exactly what it looks like. We're living in it right now. People will start getting arrested. Churches will start closing. The gospel will go down. The idiots who think that persecution is somehow helpful for the church will be proven wrong. He goes, and you'll live in a godless society like I do. He said, that's what will happen next. Okay. Along the way, and hopefully, obviously, we're praying that doesn't happen, right? Is grit, courage, and boldness in the midst of much conflict. In the midst of much conflict. Now, I think it's funny when you compare, like, 20 years ago in American evangelicalism, what we thought conflict was, right? We're like, oh, it's just been a hard season, right? And like in the heightened time of like celebrity Christianity, right? And you know, every church that opened its doors grew to 2,000 in 19 minutes, and you know, like in that phase, right? Like you know what we thought conflict was versus to some extent it might be good to us, right? To understand what conflict means a little bit more, because hopefully it'll drive something out of us. It'll make us not take for granted what we have, right? But like true, real conflict. Okay, I saw this Instagram video. Actually, Lindsay sent it to me. I thought it was pretty funny. And so we're going to show it in a second. And the reason I want to show it, it's just kind of funny. But I think it can kind of take on the mindset of sometimes that we have as Christians. And so, I don't know, whatever. Let's just watch it. It's Wednesday night. We can do whatever we want.
She would make us the best breakfast. She'd even buy strawberries in winter. They were like $10 a punnet. She'd dress us in beautiful clothes and play games with us. But then she would say she needs 5 minutes to get ready and go to her room and get dressed and just leave us in the lounge room with all of our toys that were so expensive for her to buy. At one time she told us she needed to go to the toilet, and she even shut the door and we couldn't even sit on her lap. I've never felt so alone.
Okay, that's great. And if you missed the beginning, what's going on here is this woman is making a funny video of her kids in therapy someday in the future. And the biggest complaint, right, is that she took 5 minutes to get dressed by herself and made the kids play with their expensive toys by themselves for 5 minutes, right? Goodness gracious. We laugh because it's true, right? Like in this like softened world that we live in, right? It's not hard to imagine this, and somebody could make like a Christian version of this, right? Like, we went to this church for 5 years and they didn't even give us coffee, right? Okay. All right. I promise you, somewhere somebody is at a different church right now, sitting down with a pastor, and they're like, so where'd you come from? Redemption. Is it true they don't even give you coffee? Yeah, he's such a tightwad. I hated him. Like, 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 through 9. So I say this to the high school students whenever I get a chance to pop in, or I say it to our Revere students a lot. You're not a victim. Like, if you literally can just understand that you're not a victim, your chances of success, you're going to 10x outperform everybody in today's world. 1 Peter chapter 1, verse 6 through 9. In this you rejoice, though now for a little while, if necessary, you have been grieved by various trials, so that the tested genuineness of your faith, more precious than gold that perishes, though it is tested by fire, may be found to result in praise and glory and honor at the revelation of Jesus Christ. Though you have not seen him, you love him. Though you do not now see him, you believe in him and rejoice with joy that is inexpressible and filled with glory, obtaining the outcome of your faith, the salvation of your souls. Toughen up is what it's saying. It's saying toughen up, and when you face the tough times, you have an inexpressible joy. Notice what it says. It says the tough time actually shows the genuine nature of your faith. Isn't that a great reminder? It's like it's saying this. Okay? You can live your life and go, I'm a Christian, 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 I'm a Christian. The tough time comes, now you actually know. It's saying in the tough time, if you go, no, I'm not, then what it's saying is, you never were. You never were. You thought you were. But you weren't. When did you know it was genuine? If you have a fake $100 bill, and you go, it's real, 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 it's real. Treasury agent looks at it and goes, no, it's not. Was it ever real? It was always fake. You can walk through all of your life. It's nice, it's easy. I'm a Christian, 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 I'm a Christian. Gets hard. That's when you know. That's when you know. Paul was saying, okay, he said, guys, we showed up. It was the kind of bad that people talk about. It was the kind of bad that a pastor has a conversation with a pastor in Australia and then tells his church on Wednesday night about it. It was that kind of bad. That kind of bad. Like really, so much. It was spreading around. But you know that when we showed up in that we still had boldness in our God to declare to you the gospel of God in the midst of real conflict. Not, according to that video, 2045 therapy conflict. Real conflict. Where you stick at it. Where you press in. Where you stay faithful. You stay bold. You keep preaching the truth. You don't back down. He said insurrectionist leaders, they got to have some grit, some courage, and some boldness. And friends, we all do. We all do. Let's keep going. Verse 3. For our appeal does not spring from error or impurity or any attempt to deceive. But just as we have been approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel, so we speak, not to please man, but to please God who tests our heart. I hope you enjoyed this verse-by-verse study of 1 Thessalonians. To support the work of Clear Truth Media, you can go to cleartruthmedia.com and make a donation today. You can also become a subscriber, where for just $10 a month, you can get access to premium content, connect with our contributors, as well as help us take a battle axe to progressive Christianity. Learn more at cleartruthmedia.com.